I'll never forget the exact moment I slapped her. That woman who thought she could walk into my life like she owned it. It happened so fast it felt unreal, but at the same time, it felt necessary. The air changed, thickened, almost like the universe itself had stopped to watch what I was about to do. And honestly, I didn't feel fear, not for a second. I felt a fire rising in my chest, sharp and burning, and for once I didn't swallow it down. I let it come out. I let it speak for me. People say betrayal destroys you, but sometimes it wakes up a version of you that had been asleep for years. She looked at me in shock, like she couldn't believe I had the courage to react, like she expected me to stay quiet, stay in my place, while she lived a life that never belonged to her. That slap wasn't just a slap. It was a declaration, a reminder that my story still had a pulse, that my voice still mattered. And before I go on, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? I always love knowing how far my story travels. And hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead. This is only the beginning. The sound of that slap echoed through the room. Even I felt the vibration in my hand. It wasn't rage, it was truth. It was months of ignored intuition breaking through the surface. It was the moment my heart said enough before my mind even processed it. She tried to speak, tried to play innocent, but no lie survives after a moment like that. And deep down, I felt something shifting inside me, something that had been suffocated under disappointment for far too long. When I stepped closer to her, I saw fear in her eyes, not because of me, but because she finally realized the situation she had stepped into. She wasn't just part of a little affair. She was standing inside the ruins of someone else's home, of someone else's trust. And she didn't expect consequences. Mistresses rarely do. They think love excuses everything. They think fantasy is stronger than reality. But reality always catches up, sometimes in the shape of a hand. What shocked me wasn't her guilt. It was her arrogance. The way she lifted her chin like she was the victim, like I had appeared out of nowhere to ruin her happiness. But let me be honest, that slap wasn't for her. It was for me. For all the times I stayed quiet, for all the nights I cried in silence, for all the lies I tried to swallow because I thought marriage meant endurance. That moment was my rebirth, messy, loud, imperfect, but real. And yet, even in that moment of strength, I didn't know that the worst part was still coming. I didn't know that behind me, footsteps were approaching with a storm attached to them. I didn't know that the man who promised to protect me was about to show a face I had never seen before. That slap wasn't the end of the story. It was the ignition, the spark, the beginning of a sequence of events that would turn my entire life upside down. I'll never forget the exact moment his mistress looked me in the eyes, as if she had any right to exist inside my story. The air felt heavy, almost sticky, and for a second I thought I might pass out. But at the same time, something inside me refused to step back. I took one step forward, still limping emotionally from the weight of the betrayal, but steady enough not to show fear. Her eyes widened, as if she realized too late that she had been playing with the wrong fire. My heart was racing, but my mind felt strangely calm, as if I were watching my own life from the outside. And before I go on, let me ask you again, what city are you watching this from? I love knowing where this story reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take a second. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. I leaned in slowly and asked, "Do you know who I am?" My voice came out so firm, it even startled me. She tried to compose herself, tried to pretend she had some type of superiority, but the trembling in her jaw betrayed everything. That's the thing about betrayal. People who participate in it are never prepared for the consequences. Lies feel comfortable only until the moment truth walks into the room. And right then, I was truth personified. I felt my blood boiling, but it wasn't a reckless anger. It was purpose. Quiet, sharp, rising from a place inside me that I didn't even know existed until that moment. She opened her mouth, probably to spill out some pathetic excuse, but I lifted my hand and told her to stay quiet. I didn't want to hear explanations. I didn't want stories. I didn't want to share the same oxygen she was breathing. I just wanted to look her in the eyes and understand how someone could step into another woman's life with such coldness. "You have no idea what you've just caused," I said. My voice was low, but every word felt like a blade. The tension in the room was so thick it almost had a smell, like the scent of lies evaporating under heat. And as she searched for a response, all I could think about was how far from justice I felt, and how maybe I would have to create my own. I had always been the calm type, the one who avoids fights, who tries to solve everything with conversation, but not that day. Not after everything I had seen, not after realizing how long my life had been manipulated behind my back. A woman's heart is not a toy. and mine had been stretched beyond its limit. So when she looked at me with that arrogant expression, as if she owned the situation, something exploded inside me. It wasn't blind rage, it was something deeper, older, an ancestral strength that women carry just to survive disrespect. And in that second, I knew I wouldn't leave that room without leaving a mark. I took a breath, stepped even closer, and felt a burn running down my arm. Before I even processed the thought, my body reacted. The slap I gave her wasn't just a slap. It was months of suspicion, weeks of sleepless nights, all the strange conversations, all the ignored intuition finally being heard. It was a silent scream that said, "I exist. I matter. I am here." The sound echoed through the room, freezing everything for a moment. Time, breath, air. Her expression collapsed, and I didn't feel a single drop of regret. If anything, I felt something returning to me, a piece of myself that had been gone for too long. But before I could even breathe, before I could feel the relief of standing up for myself, I heard footsteps behind me, heavy footsteps, fast, angry. And that's when I realized the confrontation wasn't over, it was just beginning. Because when I turned around, I saw my husband coming toward me with a look I'll never forget. A look without love, without remorse, without humanity. A look that revealed who he truly was. And in that frozen instant, I understood that the slap I gave his mistress wasn't the end of the scene. It was the trigger, the spark that would reveal the monster standing behind me. And what happened next? No one could have predicted. When he walked into the room, the air changed. It wasn't just his presence. It was the energy he carried, heavy, tense, suffocating. My whole body reacted before my mind could make sense of anything. I felt fear crawling through my bones, not because I was fragile, but because something in his eyes told me I wasn't looking at the same man anymore. That look, it wasn't the look of someone caught in betrayal. It was the look of someone whose authority had been challenged, someone who believed he owned me. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I had lived with a stranger. The betrayal hurt, of course, but the violence that was about to unfold would cut far deeper. He walked toward me slowly, not with calmness, but with contained fury. The mistress behind him tried to say something, maybe to defend herself, or maybe to protect herself from what she felt coming, but he didn't hear a single word. His eyes were locked on me like I was the source of every problem he ever had. When he grabbed my arm, the pain shot through me instantly. I tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip, making sure I knew he wasn't done. At that moment, I realized that men like him don't just hide their betrayal. They punish anyone who threatens their illusion of control. Justice felt far away, and survival became my only thought. I still remember the first push. It wasn't strong enough to knock me down, but strong enough to silence me. It stunned me. It woke me. I looked him in the eyes and saw something cold and empty, something I had never noticed before. The mistress tried to move closer, maybe to help, maybe to avoid being the next target, but he shouted at her to stay back. In that instant, I understood something chilling. This wasn't a moment of anger. This wasn't a man who lost control. This was who he really was when the mask fell. A man incapable of accountability. A man who believed his cruelty was justified. And that realization changed everything inside me. I tried to step away, but he was faster. His hand grabbed my face with a violence that stole my breath. The world shrank around me. There was no mistress, no betrayal, no marriage, just one question pounding inside my chest. How far will he go? My heart was beating so loudly it echoed inside my skull. But deep beneath the panic, something unexpected rose within me. A cold, steady awareness. A warning from some ancient place inside my soul, telling me, remember this. You will need every piece of this truth one day. And I knew, even in the middle of fear, something in me was being reshaped. The violence that followed wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, calculated. He pushed me again, harder this time, and I lost my balance. The floor rushed up to meet me with a force that knocked the air out of my lungs. Then I heard it, the sound that still haunts me, a sharp crack, a sickening snap. Pain exploded through my leg like fire. I knew instantly what had happened. He broke me, literally. And the worst part? He didn't flinch. His face didn't show shock or guilt or even hesitation. He looked at me as if I had caused all of it, as if I was the reason for his cruelty. And right then, through the pain, through the agony, through the disbelief, something inside me hardened, a promise, a vow, a seed of vengeance quietly taking root. The mistress ran toward me, but not out of concern, out of fear of him. He ordered her to back away, and she obeyed like a terrified animal. I lay on the floor, broken, abandoned, humiliated. He didn't help me. He didn't apologize. He didn't even stay. He simply walked out of the room, leaving me there, like discarded trash. But here's the thing about darkness. Sometimes it reveals what light hides. And in that silence, cold, sharp, cruel, I understood something very clearly. No one was coming to save me. No one, except someone who loved me enough to burn the world if needed. Someone who had never turned his back on me. Someone whose sense of justice was absolute. My father. And what happened when I told him would change everything. The pain was so intense it felt like it was swallowing my breath. I remember staring at the ceiling as they carried me out. Everything around me blurring like a scene from a movie I didn't want to be in. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life unraveling in real time. And all I could think about was the sound, that sound of my bones snapping, and the cold expression on his face as he left me on the floor. By the time I reached the hospital, the lights above me were blinding, and every bump of the stretcher sent another reminder of the betrayal that had shattered me far deeper than the fracture in my leg. Before anything else, let me ask, where are you watching this from? I love knowing how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take a second now, because what comes next is heavy. When they placed me on the cold hospital bed, I felt the last bit of warmth leave my body. A nurse asked what had happened, and I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Not because I didn't know, but because I felt ashamed. Ashamed to admit that the man who vowed to protect me was the same man who broke me. And that kind of shame hurts almost as much as the injury itself. As they pushed my stretcher through endless corridors, people glanced at me with that expression, the one that mixes pity and judgment. The silent questions, how did she let this happen? But no one knew the whole story. No one knew how much emotional weight I had carried before the physical damage even happened. When they put me in the X-ray room, the silence was brutal. Hospitals have this way of amplifying your thoughts until you can't ignore them anymore. Lying there, staring at that harsh fluorescent light, I replayed everything in my mind. The mistress, the slap, the push, the fall, the crack, over and over again, and it hit me harder than the floor did. He didn't just lose control. He wanted to hurt me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of passion or rage. This was intentional, calculated, cruel. And realizing that was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. Justice wasn't going to be given to me. I would have to demand it. When the doctor came back with the diagnosis, I already knew what he would say. I didn't need his words. The look in his eyes was enough. He talked about the fracture, the risks, the recovery time, but all I heard was noise. None of it compared to the emotional fracture I was carrying. That one didn't show up on any scan. While he explained the treatment, all I could think was, how did I get here? Not just the fall, but the years leading up to it, the ignored signs, the excuses, the loneliness inside a marriage that looked normal on the outside. The truth was clear. This fall didn't start in that room. It started long before, with every lie I tried to forgive, with every wound I tried to hide. But there's something strange about hitting rock bottom. It has a gravity of its own, a weight that forces you to confront what you ignored. When they wheeled me into my room with a heavy cast on my leg, I felt something inside me ignite. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter. A strength I didn't recognize yet. A strength that didn't come from the body but from the soul. Rock bottom is a cruel place, but it's also clean, clear. There's no more pretending down there, only truth. And in that truth, something inside me began to rebuild itself. Night fell, the hospital grew silent, and the world felt painfully far away. That was when the reality hit with full force. If I had hesitated 1 second longer, I might not be alive. That thought sliced deeper than any injury, and with it came a storm of emotions, fear, anger, grief, but also a burning desire for justice. Not the legal kind, the emotional kind. The kind you demand when someone takes everything from you. And in that suffocating silence, I knew exactly who I needed to call. The one person who never abandoned me. The one person who didn't tolerate injustice. The one person who, once awakened, changed everything. My father. And telling him would ignite a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. Silence can be terrifying, especially in a hospital room at night. The monitor beeped softly beside me. The hallway lights flickered under the door, and the cold air made my skin shiver. But nothing felt as cold as the realization settling in my chest. I couldn't walk, I couldn't fight, and I couldn't pretend anymore. The man who broke my leg didn't just hurt my body. He shattered whatever illusion I had left about who he really was. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling small in a world that suddenly felt too big. And then, out of nowhere, a single thought cut through the fear. Call Dad. Not because I wanted comfort, but because I needed justice. Real justice. When I picked up the phone, my hands trembled. Not from pain, but from the weight of what I was about to say. My father always taught me to be strong, to stand up for myself, to never let anyone dim my light. But I never imagined I would have to call him in a moment like this. Broken, humiliated, betrayed. The phone rang once, twice. And when he answered, his voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had carried storms of his own. "Princess," he said. And that word, that simple word, cracked something inside me. I hadn't cried during the assault. I hadn't cried when my leg snapped. I hadn't cried when they carried me out of the house. But when I heard my father's voice, I broke. I told him everything, every detail. The mistress, the slap, the push, the break, the look on my husband's face, the way he walked away, the silence, the fear. My voice came out uneven, shaking, but firm in one way. I wasn't hiding anything anymore. My father didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He listened, the way only a man who has seen darkness listens. And when I finished, there was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought maybe he didn't know what to say, but then he spoke, and his words were colder than the hospital air. "I'm on my way. My father has never been a man of threats. He is a man of actions, a man who believes in protecting what is his, a man who, once moved by purpose, becomes unstoppable." I knew the moment he hung up the phone that a line had been crossed, a line that my husband should have never approached. Fathers don't take kindly to seeing their daughters hurt, but seeing them broken, that awakens something primal, something ancient, something that does not forgive. And as I lay there, the fear inside me began to shift into something else, a sense of safety returning to my bones. It wasn't the type of safety that comes from knowing things will be okay. It was the kind that comes from knowing someone is about to ensure they will be. My father didn't need to yell or threaten to make his intentions clear. I could hear it in his tone. This wouldn't be handled with words. This wouldn't be handled with negotiation. This would be handled with action, with accountability, with consequences. When he said, "Stay where you are, I'm coming," I felt something inside me finally exhale. For the first time since the assault, I felt protected. As I closed my eyes, waiting for him, I realized something powerful. The moment I made that call, I chose myself. I chose survival. I chose truth. I chose justice over silence. I chose strength over fear. My father wasn't coming to comfort me. He was coming to correct what had been done. And deep down, I knew nothing in that house would ever be the same again. Not after he arrived. The storm I had survived was nothing compared to the one he was about to unleash. The hours before my father arrived felt like I was suspended between fear and relief. The hospital room was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of a monitor and the faint light creeping in from the hallway. Every sound felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater, but my thoughts were anything but quiet. They raced, spiraled, collided. I kept replaying everything that happened. The slap, the rage in his eyes, the fall, the sound of my leg breaking. And beneath all of that, something else pulsed inside me, the certainty that my father would not let this go. He was coming. And when he arrived, the world as my husband knew it would end. When the door finally opened, my father stepped inside with the kind of presence that fills an entire room, not loud, not frantic, focused, controlled. A man who carried storms behind his eyes. He walked to my bedside without saying a word at first. He looked at my cast, then at my face, and I saw something I had only seen once before, the look of a man who was ready to burn down anything that hurt his child. I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to explain again. He already knew everything he needed to know. But even then, he gently brushed my hair back, the same way he did when I was a little girl, and said, "I'm here." And that was enough. For a moment, I didn't feel broken anymore. Not physically. That pain was still sharp. But emotionally, my father had a way of grounding me, of pulling me back into myself when the world tried to tear me apart. He sat beside me, and I could feel the weight of his silence. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't uncertainty. It was calculation. He was thinking, planning, deciding what to do. And knowing him, I understood something immediately. This wouldn't end with words. My husband had crossed a boundary that no man should ever cross. And my father wasn't the type to let a man walk away after hurting his daughter like that. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a calm that was more terrifying than any anger I had ever witnessed. "You're safe now," he said. But he won't be. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Not because I was afraid of what my father would do, but because I knew he would do exactly what needed to be done. He wasn't driven by rage. He was driven by justice. A justice older than the law. A justice that lived in his blood, passed down from generations of men who protected their families with everything they had. In that moment, I didn't just feel supported, I felt avenged. He asked me one question, and only one. Do you want me to handle this? There was no threat in his tone, no pressure, no expectation, just a father giving his daughter a choice I never imagined I would have to make. My throat tightened, my eyes burned. Because the truth was simple. I didn't just want him to handle it. I needed him to. I needed someone strong enough to stand where I had fallen, to confront the monster I had once called a husband, to restore the balance that had been shattered the moment he laid a hand on me. So I nodded, a slow, deliberate nod, and that was the moment everything shifted. My father squeezed my hand, stood up, and walked toward the door with a determination that made the air heavy. He paused for a moment before leaving, looked back at me, and gave a single nod, the kind that said, "It's done." And even though he hadn't set foot in that house yet, I knew the storm had already begun. The quiet, cold kind of storm that doesn't announce itself, but destroys everything in its path. And as the door closed behind him, I realized something profound. Justice wasn't coming. Justice had already arrived, in the form of the man who raised me. I imagined my father stepping out of the hospital and walking toward his car with that silent determination only he possesses. The kind of determination that doesn't need words, threats, or rage. The night outside was cold, but he moved like a man carrying fire inside his chest, a fire awakened by the sight of his daughter broken in a hospital bed. As he drove, the road lights streaked across the windshield, giving his face a hardened glow, the kind that reveals both pain and purpose. He wasn't just a father anymore. He was a force heading straight toward the place where my life had been shattered. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need distraction. His mind was focused, sharp, replaying everything I told him, every detail, every sound I described, every bruise, every fear, and under all that, something deeper pulsed in him, a vow. My father always believed that some men only understand one language, consequences. And my husband had crossed a line that no man should ever even approach. As he gripped the steering wheel, he exhaled slowly, the way he always did when he was preparing himself for something serious. He wasn't going to that house for revenge. He was going for justice, the kind the world had failed to give me. The city outside was asleep, unaware of the storm that was coming. Streetlights flickered as he passed, and the echo of the tires on the pavement felt like the ticking of a countdown. My father knew that walking into that house meant facing whatever version of my husband still remained there, coward, manipulator, or monster. But he didn't hesitate, not even for a second. Because love, real love, isn't soft or pretty when it's protecting someone. It turns sharp, steady, unbreakable. And that was who he was in that moment, unbreakable. While my body was healing in a hospital bed, my father was carrying my fight for me. He stopped at a red light, and for a moment, everything around him froze. He glanced at his hands, the same hands that held me when I was a baby, that taught me how to ride a bike, that clapped for me at school plays. Those hands were now going to defend me again, in a way neither of us had ever imagined. The light turned green, and he drove on, the engine humming like a quiet warning to the world. A father is coming. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hand. But when he moved with that kind of intention, the universe itself seemed to shift around him. As he approached the neighborhood, memories hit him. Weekends visiting me, dinners at a table that once felt like a home, moments when he believed I had built a good life for myself. And now he was returning to that same place, not with pride, but with a mission. The mission to dismantle the lie that had been sold to both of us. The betrayal wasn't just mine, it was his too, because he trusted the man who hurt me. And that betrayal triggered something inside him that he couldn't ignore, something ancestral, protective, dangerous. Finally, the house came into view, dark, quiet, lifeless. But my father didn't see walls or windows. He saw the crime scene of his daughter's suffering. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat still for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle in his bones. Then he stepped out, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door with slow, deliberate steps. No fear, no hesitation, only purpose. And as he reached the entrance, I swear I could almost feel the air change from the hospital bed. Because what happened next would begin the chain reaction that would decide the fate of everyone inside that house. The house looked different in my mind than it did when my father stepped into it. I always imagined that home as a place full of warmth, filled with memories I had tried so hard to protect. But when he opened that door, he didn't see a home. He saw the aftermath of betrayal, a silent battlefield, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but poisoned. He stepped inside slowly, the wooden floor creaking beneath his shoes like the house itself was warning him about what lived inside. The air was heavy, thick with lies, anger, and the ghost of everything I had endured. He looked around, noticing details most people would overlook: the disorganized shoes by the door, the wine glass on the table, the faint smell of perfume that didn't belong to me. Every trace of their betrayal hit him like a physical blow, but he didn't react outwardly. My father was a man who held storms behind calm eyes. Instead, he walked further in, letting the weight of the truth settle in his chest. He wasn't there to doubt me. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there because someone hurt his daughter, and that meant the house was no longer neutral ground. It was a crime scene. The living room still had the cushion I had fallen onto after the push, the fabric slightly dented as if it remembered my body collapsing there. My father stood over it, his jaw tightening, his hand curling subtly as he imagined exactly what I had gone through. Some men lash out immediately when anger consumes them. My father wasn't one of them. He let silence build into something sharper, something colder, something far more dangerous. Because silence gives you clarity, and clarity gives you precision. He wasn't looking for chaos. He was looking for truth. Then he heard footsteps. Slow, hesitant. My husband appeared in the hallway, and the two men locked eyes for the first time since everything happened. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the room with a kind of tension that could split the air. My husband opened his mouth to speak, maybe to lie, maybe to manipulate, but my father cut him off with a stare that could freeze blood. A stare that said, "I know what you did." A stare that stripped every excuse from his throat. That moment alone made my husband step back. The mistress peeked from behind him, terrified. Not terrified of my father, terrified of what she realized too late. She wasn't in control. She was never in control. She was simply caught in a reality she thought would never have consequences. My father didn't even look at her at first. His attention was fixed on the man who had broken me, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and precise, each word sharp enough to leave marks. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask how. Those questions didn't matter. What mattered was that my father stood in the same room where I had been betrayed, hurt, and discarded. As he took another step forward, my father wasn't just a man anymore. He was justice made flesh. And everyone inside that house felt it. The walls felt it. Even the silence felt it. Because what came next wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a reckoning. A reckoning my husband never believed would come. A reckoning my father delivered without a tremor in his voice. And while I lay in that hospital bed miles away, I felt it in my bones. The moment justice finally entered the home that once tried to break me. My father stood in the center of that living room like a storm trapped inside a human body. He didn't speak right away, and that silence was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. My husband shifted nervously, glancing at the mistress as if she could save him. She couldn't. No one could. My father's presence alone was enough to peel away every layer of lies that had filled that house. He didn't need evidence. He didn't need explanations. He carried the truth in his eyes, the truth I had given him between sobs in a hospital bed, and now he stood face to face with the man who had hurt me in every way imaginable. The mistress tried to step forward, maybe to justify herself or soften the moment, but my father raised one hand slightly, and she stopped as if frozen in place. It wasn't a threat. It was authority, the kind of authority that doesn't come from size or volume, but from righteousness. He looked at my husband with a calm so cold it made the entire room shrink. "You put your hands on my daughter," he said, his voice low and steady. My husband opened his mouth to defend himself, but nothing came out. Not because he had no words, but because the truth had cornered him. And truth, when faced head-on, leaves a man speechless. My father stepped closer, and each step felt like judgment itself crossing the room. "She walked into this house with love," he continued, "and you turned it into a battlefield." Every word landed like a blow, not physical but moral, a kind of reckoning that doesn't leave bruises on the skin, but tears through a man's soul. My husband tried to reclaim control, raising his voice, insisting I had overreacted, that things were complicated, that he didn't mean to hurt me. But the excuses fell apart before they even fully formed. My father's face remained unreadable, carved from something ancient and immovable. Then my father did something I will never forget. He stepped past my husband and looked around the house as if memorizing the scene of the crime. The wine glass, the crooked pillow, the faint smear on the wall from when I fell, the cracks in the intimacy that had once existed in that home. He wasn't just seeing a room. He was seeing the destruction caused by betrayal, the aftermath of cruelty, the remnants of my pain. And he turned back to my husband with a single sentence that cut deeper than any physical punishment ever could. "You don't deserve to call yourself a man." The mistress finally spoke, her voice trembling, trying to explain herself, trying to place blame anywhere except where it belonged. But my father didn't engage with her. He looked at her the way someone looks at collateral damage, not the cause. "You will leave now," he said simply. And the way she gathered her things, pale and shaking, showed she understood fully. This wasn't a request. It was an order. An order she should have feared long before stepping into my life. She slipped out the door, leaving behind the man she thought she understood. She didn't. Not truly, but she was about to. And then the shift, the moment the air grew heavy, the moment justice settled into its rightful place. My father squared his shoulders and looked my husband in the eyes, not as a father-in-law, not as a visitor, but as a man delivering consequence. "You broke her," he said softly. "Now you answer for it." And in that instant, the entire house held its breath. Because what came next wouldn't simply expose the truth. It would end the story my husband believed he was entitled to control. Justice had entered that house wearing my father's face, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would survive unchanged. I kept imagining my father walking down the same street I once walked every day, a street that had witnessed my laughter, my disappointments, the nights I waited at the window pretending everything was fine, a street that watched me try, again and again, to keep a home standing on foundations I didn't know were cracking. And now, that same street was about to witness a completely different kind of story. As I lay in the hospital bed, counting the slow ticks of the clock, I could almost feel him approaching the house that once smelled like hope, now reeking of betrayal. It was strange to think I once believed that place was my refuge. Now it was nothing but a stage built on lies, and imagining my father crossing that threshold sent a chill through me I can still feel. I knew exactly how he'd move. My father never arrives banging on doors or shouting into the night. He arrives like the wind that comes before a storm, quiet, steady, impossible to ignore. He would study the house from the outside first, noticing things most people overlook. The window that never closed right, the hallway light my husband always left on, the gate that creaked even when pushed gently. He saw details no one else saw. That's who he was. And while imagining him standing there, analyzing the lies embedded into that home, I realized the house wasn't just a place. It was a symbol of the life I tried to build with someone who didn't deserve a single part of me. Now, it had become the center of his mission, the battleground where truth would finally replace illusion. In my mind, the scene played out like a movie projected onto the white hospital wall. I could see him walking up to the front door, pausing just long enough to inhale deeply, adjusting his jacket as if preparing for something sacred, not out of fear, but out of focus. My father never acted impulsively. His steps were calculated, deliberate. Did he knock? Maybe. Or maybe he simply pushed the door open, knowing my husband was careless enough not to lock it. And that was the moment the house, the place where I laughed, cried, and fought for a love that didn't exist, transformed into what it had actually always been, contaminated ground. The kind of place where justice had to enter eventually, even if through the hands of my father. I thought about the mistress, too. About her face when she saw me in that room, the panic she tried to hide, the false confidence she clung to. She thought she was safe in that house. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she was part of some forbidden romance story, when in reality, she was just one more accessory to a miserable plot. And while I lay in pain, I realized something my father already knew. She wasn't the root of the problem. She was part of it, yes, but she wasn't the core. Still, my father was not a man who dealt with wounds halfway. He uprooted everything, all at once. And she, unfortunately for her, was standing too close to the root. A tightness grew in my chest imagining what was unfolding inside those walls. It wasn't just about the present moment. It was about all the years hidden within it, the swallowed tears, the silenced arguments, the nights I curled up pretending things were fine, the endless attempts to make my husband see my worth. All of it now lived inside the cracks of that house. And while my leg throbbed in pain, something else pulsed stronger inside me, the understanding that the house wasn't just witnessing justice. It was part of it. Because sometimes, the places where we suffer must also witness the fall of those who caused it. I didn't know how things would unfold exactly, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing inside that house would remain untouched. Not the lies, not the silence, not the man who hurt me. My father didn't operate with chaos. He operated with precision. He didn't destroy to destroy. He destroyed to reset the balance. As I lay there, breathing through the pain, imagining each step he took through the hallway, I felt something settle inside me, a deep truth, that the place where everything began was also the place where everything would end. And whatever came after that ending, whatever waited for me on the other side of this nightmare, would mark the beginning of the life I was meant to live all along. I'll never forget the feeling in my chest as I imagined what was happening inside that house while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. It was as if my heartbeat had gotten up from the mattress and walked into that living room with my father. Every minute stretched, slow and sharp, as if the walls around me knew something was unfolding that would shift the course of my entire life. I could almost see it. My father stepping into the center of that poisoned home, my husband facing him with fear disguised as anger, and the mistress standing frozen behind him. The truth was no longer hiding. It was no longer soft. It was no longer negotiable. And for the first time since the betrayal began, I felt that justice had a heartbeat, and it matched my father's. My father's presence doesn't scream. It doesn't explode. It compresses the air, makes it dense, heavy, unescapable. I could imagine the exact moment the mistress understood that the situation was no longer about her or her fantasies. It was about the consequences she never believed would come. She probably tried to step back, to fade into the background, but in a room filled with truth, there is nowhere to hide. As for my husband, I knew him well enough to know he attempted what he always did: control the narrative, twist, manipulate, deflect. But manipulation only works on people who are willing to be fooled. My father wasn't one of them. My father had no interest in lies, only in accountability. I'm certain the confrontation started without a single word, just two men facing each other, one who inflicted harm, and one who would no longer allow it. My husband might have tried to justify himself, maybe even raise his voice, believing intimidation would work, but he had never met someone who could silence a room with nothing but a look. My father didn't need to shout. His silence was sharper than a blade, and every second that passed forced my husband to face the reality he had avoided his entire life. He was not invincible. He was not untouchable, and he was not going to escape what he had done to me. I imagined my father leaning forward, his voice low, steady, slicing through every excuse like glass. My husband, realizing the weight of his own actions for the first time, would try to step back, but there is no room to retreat when the truth corners you. The mistress, cowered trembling in the background, would finally see the man she adored for who he really was, a coward attempting to shrink beneath the consequences he created. Betrayal always looks glamorous when shielded by darkness, but the minute light hits it, the whole illusion collapses. And my father carried the brightest, harshest light they had ever faced. The shouting didn't come from my father. It came from my husband, desperate, frantic, sloppy, trying to rebuild a story collapsing in front of him, trying to grab control as it slipped through his fingers like sand. But my father's voice, calm and unwavering, would cut through every attempt. For the first time in his life, my husband was dealing with someone he couldn't manipulate, someone who saw straight through him, someone who had nothing to lose and everything to defend. I imagined the walls of that home trembling with truths that had been buried for far too long. And then came the breaking point, the moment everything inside that house shifted irreversibly. My father stepping closer, my husband's mask cracking, silence thickening like a storm about to split the sky open. I felt it from my hospital bed, felt the shift deep inside me, because what was happening in that house was more than a confrontation. It was the collapse of a man's false kingdom. It was the destruction of a lie I had lived inside for years. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, it was the beginning of my freedom. Lying in that hospital bed, I kept imagining the exact moment the mistress realized her fantasy had just collapsed. I could almost see her face, the shock, the confusion, the sudden understanding that this wasn't the story she thought she was part of. Women like her never imagine consequences. They step into other people's lives believing they are irresistible, untouchable, special, but that illusion only survives until the truth arrives. And my father was truth in its sharpest form. As I lay there fighting my own pain, I realized something important. She wasn't prepared for the reality she had signed up for. She thought she was playing in a romance. She didn't know she had stepped into a war. My father's presence alone would have shattered her confidence. He didn't need to yell or threaten to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. One look from him would have peeled away every layer of arrogance she carried. I know her type. They only feel brave when hidden in the shadows, when they believe the lies whispered in their ears. But the moment light hits them, everything changes. And with my father standing there, she would finally see the man she chose for who he truly was. Not a lover, not a hero, but a coward running from responsibility. A man who betrayed his own wife and then broke her bones to protect his ego. I imagined her staring at him, terrified, realizing she had never really known him at all. The disappearances she overlooked, the half-truths she accepted, the promises he made that never turned into action. She probably thought she was different, that she was the exception. Mistresses always believe they will be treated better than the wife, but the truth is simple. If he betrayed me, he would betray her. If he hurt me, he could hurt her. Betrayal does not discriminate. And as she watched my father confront him, the illusion she had clung to must have shattered completely. Her relationship had never been love. It had always been a lie built on top of my suffering. I wondered if she remembered the moment she saw me in that room, the slap I gave her, the fire in my eyes. Maybe she thought I was dramatic, unstable, overreacting. But now, faced with my father, she finally understood the full picture. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She was part of the destruction. She helped build the story that led to my broken body. And standing in that house with my father, watching her like a judge weighing intentions and guilt, she would feel something she never expected to feel. Shame. Heavy, suffocating shame. The kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. What struck me as I imagined it all was this. I didn't need revenge on her. Life was already punishing her in the most brutal way, by forcing her to see the truth, by forcing her to confront the mess she helped create. My father didn't need to lay a hand on her for her to crumble. His silence alone would have been enough to unravel every excuse she had prepared. She wasn't the main enemy, but she was not innocent either. She chose to stand beside a man she barely understood. And now she was trapped in the same fire she helped ignite. As I lay there in the hospital, breathing through waves of pain, something inside me softened, not for her, but for myself. I realized I didn't need to hate her. I didn't need to carry her weight. Her reality had finally caught up with her, and nothing she could say or do would erase the truth. She had been part of the cause, and now she would face part of the consequence. Because the next chapter of that night, what my father would do, what my husband would face, was not hers to control. It was mine. And when my father left that house, nothing inside those walls would ever be the same again. While I lay in that hospital bed, my leg throbbing and my mind spiraling, there was one truth I couldn't ignore. Whatever was unfolding inside that house would change everything. My father wasn't a man of impulsive rage. He wasn't driven by chaos or blind fury. He was driven by principle, by the absolute certainty that someone who hurt his daughter needed to face the weight of what they had done. And my husband, a man who lived his entire life believing he could manipulate anyone, was finally standing in front of someone he couldn't control, someone he couldn't lie to, someone who didn't fear him. And that realization, that sudden collapse of his false superiority, was a punishment in itself. Men like him always think they're untouchable. They build a throne out of deception, out of the insecurities of others, out of the silence they force onto the ones who love them. My husband never once imagined that his actions would have consequences. He believed I would stay quiet, endure, forgive, shrink. He believed I was weak. But when I told my father what happened, I shattered the illusion he had built around himself. And now, facing a man who could see right through him, he had nowhere left to hide. I imagined him realizing too late that the lies he used to control me held no power in front of my father. I could almost picture him trying to explain himself, reaching for excuses, twisting facts, minimizing what he did. It wasn't what it looks like. You don't understand. She provoked me. These men always have a script, a rehearsed performance ready to go. But my father wasn't an audience. He wasn't there to be convinced. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to hold him accountable. And every lie my husband attempted would crumble the moment it left his mouth. Because deep down, he knew the truth too. There was no justification for what he did. No story that could rewrite the moment he broke my bone with his own hands. And the mistress? I'm sure she stood in the background, finally seeing the real version of the man she thought she loved. Fear tends to strip illusions bare. When the person you idolize is confronted by someone with real strength, their cowardice becomes impossible to hide. She was probably trembling, not just out of fear of my father, but out of fear of realizing she had given herself to a man who couldn't defend his actions, who couldn't stand tall in front of truth, who couldn't protect anyone, not even himself. Betrayal always collapses when exposed to real integrity. I imagined my father speaking slowly, choosing every word with the precision of a blade. You broke her. That alone would have been enough to dismantle any remaining defenses my husband had. Because when spoken by a man like my father, a man who raised me, who taught me strength, who loved me in a way my husband never understood, those words carried the weight of judgment. My father didn't need violence. His presence was violence enough. He forced my husband to face himself. And facing oneself after committing unforgivable cruelty is one of the most painful punishments a person can endure. As I lay there in the hospital, I realized something powerful. Vengeance doesn't always come through fists or screams. Sometimes vengeance is watching the truth catch up to someone who spent years running from it. Sometimes vengeance is watching a man who thought he was powerful crumble under the weight of his own actions. And sometimes vengeance is simply knowing that, from that moment on, he would never again look in the mirror without seeing the monster he tried to hide. Whatever my father did in that house, whatever consequences unfolded, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The life my husband once controlled was gone, and the justice I thought I'd never receive had finally arrived. Back in the hospital room, time moved slowly, painfully slow, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The beeping of the monitor beside me felt distant, the lights too bright, the sheets too stiff, but nothing felt as heavy as the silence in my chest. I lay there knowing something irreversible was happening in that house. Not the kind of justice written on paper, but the kind that settles deep in the bones, the kind that doesn't need permission. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment that led me there, the betrayal, the slap, the violence, the break. And for the first time since everything happened, I felt a strange calm wash over me, not because things were okay, but because I knew my father was ensuring they would never be the same again. I used to believe justice came through systems, through laws, through courts, through rules people were supposed to follow. But after what I lived through, I learned a different truth. Some wounds are too personal for paperwork. Some betrayals run too deep for signatures and stamps. What my husband did wasn't just wrong. It was cruel. Cruel in a way that couldn't be undone with apologies or explanations. My father understood that without me ever having to say it. He wasn't acting out of rage. He wasn't acting out of revenge. He was acting out of balance, restoring something that had been shattered the moment my bones broke under my husband's hands. And knowing that made me feel stronger, even as I lay there barely able to move. When my father finally returned to the hospital, something in the air shifted. He walked in slowly, quietly, but the energy around him was different. Heavy, final. He wasn't a storm anymore. He was the calm after it. He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face, my expression, the pain I tried to hide. Then he sat down beside me, the chair creaking under his weight, and for a few seconds we just stared at each other. No words, no explanation, but the truth hung between us, thick and undeniable. I searched his eyes for answers, for details, for what he had done, but he didn't speak right away. My father always believed that some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. Finally, he said only 2 words, "It's over." And those words, simple as they were, carried the weight of everything he had taken care of. They weren't about my marriage. That had been dead long before the mistress or the slap. They weren't about the fracture. The doctors would handle that. They weren't even about the betrayal. I had already survived it. His "it's over" meant something deeper, something final, something that closed a chapter permanently. He didn't need to tell me what he did. He didn't need to describe what happened. The truth was in his voice, steady and cold, and that was enough. I felt a release inside me, not happiness, not triumph, but a kind of liberation I didn't expect, like something had been lifted off my chest after suffocating me for months. My father held my hand, strong and steady, and I realized he had carried this pain with me long before I ever admitted it aloud. The strength he showed wasn't violence. It was love, fierce, unwavering, unconditional love. And I understood something I had never fully realized before. Justice isn't always about punishing someone. Sometimes it's about protecting someone. Sometimes the justice we need comes in the form of someone refusing to let us carry our suffering alone. As he spoke softly about my recovery and what the next few months would look like, I realized that justice had already been delivered. Not because he hurt anyone, but because he refused to let someone hurt me again. My father's presence alone restored a balance my husband had destroyed. And while I still didn't know exactly what had happened inside that house, I didn't need the details. Something inside me recognized that whatever had been broken, there could never harm me again. But now that justice had been served, the question that lingered was, what comes after justice? What comes after the storm is over? That answer would come in the next chapter of my healing, one I wasn't ready for, but one I desperately needed. The days that followed felt like walking through fog, heavy, quiet, and slow. Nurses came and went, adjusting my leg, checking my vitals, offering small smiles that couldn't touch the deeper pain inside me. The physical injury was obvious, a fracture, a cast, a timeline for healing. But the emotional injury, there was no timeline for that. No cast, no instructions. Recovery was supposed to start with my leg, but every time I closed my eyes, I realized something else had snapped inside me long before the bone broke. I wasn't trying to rebuild just my mobility. I was trying to rebuild the parts of myself I had abandoned while loving the wrong person. When you survive a betrayal that brutal, the first thing that breaks isn't the body, it's your sense of worth. Lying there, I kept asking myself dangerous questions. How did I not see it sooner? Why didn't I leave? How did I allow this? And those questions hurt more than the fracture. But over time, I learned something important. Pain makes us lie to ourselves. You don't allow abuse, you survive it. You don't miss red flags, you hope they're wrong. And as I replayed everything in my mind, I slowly realized that blaming myself wasn't part of healing, it was part of the wound. And I wasn't going to let my mind keep hurting me the way he did. Every day, as the swelling went down and the pain eased, a different kind of healing began inside me. A quiet strength started rising from a place I didn't know existed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was steady, like a flame rebuilding itself after being smothered. My father's strength, the strength that walked into that house for me, began to echo inside my chest. Not with violence or revenge, but with clarity, with dignity, with the understanding that I had survived something designed to break me. Yet here I was, breathing, healing, returning to myself inch by inch. Recovery also meant facing the truth of who I had become. For so long, I'd bent myself into shapes that didn't belong to me, all to keep a marriage alive that had been dead long before the mistress ever walked into it. As I relearned how to move, I also relearned how to see myself, not as someone weak or naive, but as someone who had endured far more than anyone should. And I realized something. Healing doesn't start with forgiving the person who hurt you. It starts with forgiving yourself for the person you had to be in order to survive them. There were days when the emotional pain hit harder than the physical one, days when tears came out of nowhere, days when I doubted my strength, days when I felt angry at myself. But every time, I remembered my father's words, one step at a time. And that became my mantra. One step to breathe, one step to rest, one step to reclaim the parts of me I had lost along the way. Healing wasn't linear, it wasn't pretty, but it was real. And if you're going through something like this, stay close. I want you here with me through every chapter. As the weeks passed, my legs slowly regained movement, and so did my spirit. Each stretch, each painful exercise, each moment of effort reminded me, I'm alive, not just existing, alive. The fracture was temporary, but the strength I was gaining would stay with me forever. I realized that my recovery wasn't about going back to who I used to be. It was about becoming who I should have been all along, someone whole, someone awake, someone free. And though the journey ahead was long, I knew one thing with certainty. This was only the beginning of my return to myself. Rebuilding your life after something so devastating doesn't feel like fixing a broken home. It feels like rebuilding your soul from ashes. When I finally left the hospital and arrived at my parents' house, the world felt unfamiliar. The air, the bedroom, even my own reflection in the mirror. Everything looked different. Maybe because I was different. Each step I took with my healing leg felt like stepping into a life I didn't recognize anymore. The betrayal had shaken everything, but the healing, that was slowly rewriting me. I wasn't just recovering from a fall. I was recovering from years of emotional exhaustion, from silence, from pretending. And with every breath, I felt myself returning, or maybe emerging for the very first time. The first days were strange. The coffee tasted different. The mornings felt quieter. Even the sunlight through the curtains looked foreign. Trauma has this way of shifting the world's colors. Where I once saw routine, I now saw possibility and danger. And the mirror reflected someone I didn't fully know yet. A woman who survived something unimaginable. A woman who wasn't as fragile as she had believed. I didn't want to go back to who I had been. That version of me had endured too much, swallowed too much pain, accepted too much disrespect. Now, standing on the other side of the storm, I felt something new taking shape inside me. A version of myself built from strength, not survival. Everyday tasks became rituals of reclaiming myself. Making my own breakfast wasn't just about eating, it was about honor. Showers became moments of washing away old versions of me. Combing my hair wasn't vanity. It was an act of reintroducing myself to myself. Slowly, I realized that rebuilding wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward with intention. Because the truth was harsh. I had lost parts of myself long before the fracture. For years, I had given so much of myself to someone who didn't deserve even pieces of me. But now, those pieces were coming back. Quietly, but unmistakably. Trust was the hardest part. Not trust in people, trust in myself. Betrayal cracks your inner compass. Every thought feels suspicious. Every memory feels tainted. I kept thinking, how did I miss it? How did I allow it? But healing demanded a shift. Instead of asking why I stayed, I started asking what I learned. Instead of punishing myself for my past, I began honoring myself for surviving it. My father's strength echoed inside me, but differently now. It wasn't a shield protecting me. It was a spark reminding me that I could protect myself, that I could rebuild from truth, not fear, from power, not guilt. My relationship with my father also deepened during this period. He didn't overwhelm me with questions or advice. He gave me something more valuable: presence. Solid, steady presence. Sometimes he brought me tea. Sometimes he sat in silence beside me. Sometimes he simply looked at me like he was proud that I was still here, still fighting, still breathing. And somehow, that quiet acknowledgement gave me more healing than any words could. One step at a time, he would say. And that became the anchor I held onto. One emotional step, one physical step, one day at a time. As the days passed, I felt a surprising lightness growing inside me, not because the pain was gone, but because it was no longer in control. I began dreaming again, simple dreams at first, traveling, studying something new, maybe moving somewhere fresh. I didn't know exactly what my future looked like, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like it belonged to me. The pain, the betrayal, the fracture, they were part of my story, but they were not my identity. I was not the broken version of myself. I was the reborn version. And as I took each step, shaky, painful, but real, I understood that rebuilding my life wasn't just possible. It had already begun. There comes a moment in every healing process when something inside you shifts. Not because the pain disappears, but because you finally stop running from it. For me, that moment arrived quietly. One morning, I woke up and realized I wasn't afraid of remembering anymore. The memories were still painful, of course, but they weren't controlling me. It was like I'd been holding my breath for months, and suddenly my lungs remembered how to open. Trauma doesn't release you all at once. It lets go in layers. And as those layers peeled back, I began to see myself clearly for the first time in years. Not as a victim, not as a broken woman, but as someone who survived a darkness that could have swallowed me whole, and still found her way back to the light. I started noticing small changes, subtle at first, but powerful. My voice felt stronger. My decisions felt firmer. I didn't say yes when I meant no anymore. I didn't shrink to make others comfortable. I didn't let guilt twist itself around my choices. It was like reclaiming territory that had been stolen from me. Little by little, I began to build boundaries, real boundaries, the kind I had never allowed myself to have. And what surprised me the most was how natural it felt. Healing didn't make me harder. It made me wiser. It made me aware of who truly deserved space in my life, and who never did. Every time I looked at my cast, I no longer saw the moment he broke me. I saw the moment I refused to stay broken. That cast became a symbol, not of fragility, but of transformation. My father's strength, my own resilience, the truth that burst open the walls of that house. All of it lived inside that healing bone. And I realized something important. The truth doesn't just free you from others. It frees you from the lies you tell yourself. I had spent years believing I wasn't enough, that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant silence. But the truth shattered those beliefs. And in their place, something beautiful began to grow. I also learned that healing isn't lonely. It's clarifying. You start seeing people for who they really are. Some step closer, some step away, and some reveal they were never truly with you to begin with. I watched old friendships fade and unexpected support appear from places I never imagined. People who had only known fragments of my story suddenly became pillars in my life, and those who had once pretended to care vanished the moment I broke, showing me the truth of their hearts without saying a word. Pain has a way of revealing what comfort hides. But the biggest transformation happened inside my mind. I stopped replaying the why and the how. I stopped dissecting the betrayal. Instead, I focused on understanding myself, my patterns, my wounds, my needs. I learned to trust my intuition again, to listen to the warnings I once silenced, to honor the small voice that whispered, "You deserve better," even when I ignored it. Slowly, I became the kind of woman I once looked up to, grounded, aware, unafraid of the truth. And that truth, once so painful, became my greatest source of power. As my leg grew stronger, so did my spirit. I no longer felt haunted by what happened. I felt awakened by it. I didn't want revenge anymore. I didn't want explanations. I didn't need closure from anyone but myself, because the truth had already set me free. And as the final days of recovery approached, I realized something profound. I wasn't just healing from what he did to me. I was healing into the person I was always meant to become. And the next step in my journey, the final step, would show me exactly how far I had come. There came a moment, months after the storm, when I finally felt something inside me shift, quietly, softly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a sunrise bursting through the clouds. It was subtle, like a whisper. A feeling that the pain that once lived in every corner of my chest had turned into a visitor, one that stayed for a bit, talked for a moment, and then left. And for the first time, the pain wasn't a resident. It didn't own me anymore. It just passed through me. That was when I realized that the rebirth I'd been waiting for wasn't coming with fireworks. It was coming with peace. And that peace told me something profound. The betrayal that once consumed me no longer defined my life. It was part of my story, but not the ending. I began forming new habits, small rituals that grounded me, slow morning walks, even with the brace still hugging my leg, cooking meals I once avoided because there was no time, sorting through old photographs and remembering the version of myself I abandoned while trying to make someone else happy. I started journaling, sometimes a single sentence, sometimes pages of thoughts. And in those quiet practices, I realized something important. Healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live beyond it, to shape a life not built from pain, but from purpose. And as this shift happened inside me, I felt an energy I hadn't felt in years, a strength rising from the deepest part of my soul. I also revisited dreams I had once shelved, books I wanted to read, courses I'd postponed, trips I'd promised myself. I thought about writing a book one day, maybe even telling my story. I imagined traveling somewhere I'd never been, standing in places untouched by my past. And the more I explored those thoughts, the more I understood. My dreams had never died. They had only been waiting for me to return. And with every step toward them, I felt myself growing, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. My strength no longer came from surviving him. It came from rediscovering myself. Then came a morning, quiet, normal, unremarkable, when I realized something extraordinary. My heart felt still, not numb, not fearful, just still, peaceful. It wasn't angry at him anymore. It didn't crave revenge. It didn't ask for explanations. The vengeance I once burned for had transformed into something much more powerful. Clarity. Justice, I learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the simple awareness that the person who hurt you no longer has access to you. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. That realization set me free in a way nothing else ever could. For the first time, I dreamed about a future that wasn't shaped by fear. I imagined changing cities, starting fresh, meeting new people, building a different kind of life, one where I didn't shrink or sacrifice myself to keep someone else comfortable. I realized that the greatest justice I could ever achieve was refusing to live chained to the past. My rebirth wasn't dramatic. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, strong, certain. I wasn't the woman I used to be, and thank God for that. That version of me died the day my leg broke, but the woman who rose afterward, she was unbreakable. She was mine. And so the cycle ended, not with rage, but with release. Not with revenge, but with rebirth. I wasn't healed completely, but I was healing continuously. My story didn't end in that house or in that hospital bed. It ended here, in this moment of clarity, and opened the door to a new beginning, one where I no longer carried the weight of someone else's cruelty, one where I could build a life shaped entirely by my own hands. And as I breathed in that new truth, I understood. The final step wasn't about letting go of him. It was about embracing me. Finally, fully, deeply, me. You know, after everything I went through, I realized life doesn't wait for us to be ready to start over. It just keeps moving, and it's up to us to decide whether we move with it or stay trapped in what broke us. The pain I lived through didn't define me, but it shaped me. And if there's one thing this entire journey taught me, it's that we always have two choices. Let the fall bury us, or use the broken pieces to build the strongest version of ourselves. So now I want to ask you something. Looking at your own life, what are you still holding on to that you know it's time to let go of? What chapter are you afraid to close, even though it's been hurting you for years? And the hardest question of all, how long will you let your past decide what you deserve in the future? The truth is harsh but liberating. No one is coming to save you. No one will heal for you. No one will fight your battles. But you can, and you must. Because just like me, you have a strength inside you that you probably don't even realize yet. And if this story touched you if it made you reflect, if it opened your eyes even a little, don't leave without subscribing to the channel. Turn on the notifications. Stay close. There's so much more I want to share with you, and I want you walking beside me through all of it. The world is too big, too beautiful, too full of possibility for you to stay chained to someone or something that broke you. Now it's your turn.